In this segment, we're going to start talking about summarization. So summarization is a very broad problem in NLP that encapsulates a lot of different things. We're going to think more specifically about, trying to produce a summary of a few sentences that, might reflect the content in a news article or a collection of news articles or something like that. There's plenty of other texts that you can summarize as well. You can summarize kind of biomedical research papers. You could be summarizing legal documents or contracts, etc. And there's even other kinds of formats you could produce. For example, maybe you want to summarize a series of events by producing a timeline or something like that. But for now, here's what we're going to look at. So we've got maybe one article about an earthquake near the Iraq-Iran border. Or maybe we have a few articles about this. And the question we need to answer to start out is, what makes a good summary? How do we go about constructing something which is going to convey the key information of these articles to a user who wants to understand it? All right, so let's take a look at what's going on inside these articles. And so this is a pretty long article, so we're not going to read through all of it. We start off with some information that's probably pretty important. The main event, a strong earthquake hit large parts of northern Iraq, etc. And then state TV said at least 6 people had been killed. So this is something that a priori we might think is fairly important. And we in fact see this confirmed later when we start talking about the at least 6 people were killed again. Like the fact that we're repeating this information probably indicates that it is fairly central to the article here. And then we have some other details, like for example, where the epicenter is, villages being damaged, the magnitude of the earthquake, etc. And so we can identify all these individual facts, and the question is, which ones do we pick, and how do we put this together into a summary? All right, let's take a look at another article. So here we also see information about 8 villages have been damaged. And this tells us that probably that is some useful information. So if we're looking at these 2 articles at the same time, the fact that information is being repeated either within the same article or across articles tells us that it's probably fairly important. So here's a summary I'll give of what's going on here. A massive earthquake of magnitude 7.3 struck Iraq on Sunday. The epicenter was close to the Iranian border. 8 villages were damaged and 6 people were killed in Iran. All right, so what did I do? Well, first I was a little bit sneaky and actually just took part of this sentence from the Indian Express article directly as the first sentence of the summary. And then I talked about the epicenter and this idea of 8 villages being damaged and 6 people being killed, which again, we saw each of these facts repeated, and so that tells us that these are probably important factors. All right, so this can help us understand maybe what's needed in order to do this task well, and it's going to help us start to break down the approaches that we're going to explore here. So first, we need a notion of what's called content selection. This is the first or kind of an integral part of any summarization model, which is fundamentally there's more information than we can possibly convey. How do we pick what the right content to actually display to a user is? And so the way we know that is that the right content in this case was repeated, and we might also have domain-specific clues. So if we saw summaries of a bunch of news articles as training data, and some of those news articles were about earthquakes, then we would say, oh, okay, here's an article about an earthquake. So probably and we always see them talking about the magnitude and the epicenter in these summaries. So we think that those are probably important factors to include in our summary as well. All right, and the second kind of aspect here is generation, or kind of rendering the actual summary and writing it out. So we're going to structure our exploration of summarization across 3 different approaches. The first is called extraction, where we are going to just pick out sentences from the original document or documents to form the summary. This is obviously the simplest approach in that we can just extract stuff and not have to worry about actually, generating a fluent summary. But it's also somewhat limited in that you're stuck with the sentences that you've got in the document originally. Second, we have an approach called compression, which is you could think of as pulling out a sentence and then allowing yourself to delete stuff from it. And then the third approach is what's called abstraction. Here we're going to basically say that our summaries can be any essentially string in any sequence of words. So this is where we're going to be using things like sequence models and pre-trained text generation models in order to actually generate a word-by-word summary that may still decide to extract and copy some content from the input, but is generally going to have a lot of paraphrasing and other kinds of factors going on. So these are the three types of summarization that we're going to explore over the next few segments. But this gives you an idea of the things that we need our models to be able to capture, this content selection and then generation pipeline. That's the end of this segment.